was the governor of California in the 1970s. He's the attorney general now. He sued the city of San Bernardino, alleging, this is the state suing a city, saying your general plan is not in compliance with the law, meaning the plan for the whole city, because it doesn't account for climate change in its planning. And ultimately, that case was settled, but settled in such a way where now you have to analyze climate change in long-range planning. So the state actually put pressure from the Attorney General's office on the city and changed the way law is done in California on this. But go ahead to the next slide. Okay, the state's been monitoring, the planning research office has been monitoring what people have been doing, meaning consultants have been doing. And they took a random, not random, just this period, 6-month period last year, to see what they got. Now, they're the clearinghouse for all these documents coming through them, and they got 82 documents coming through their office that looked at climate change. That's 5% of all the environmental documents that came through their office. First of all, let me put that in perspective. 5% of 82 is 5% of something. What's the math there? That's 1,600 documents. 1,600 environmental documents for different projects in California came through the state in a 6-month period. That's the level of how things are done there. But only 5% of them dealt with climate change as an issue. But they looked at all those 5%, which included documents we did, looked at all kinds of projects, big housing projects, energy infrastructure projects, oil refineries, habitat restoration, and that's an interesting one, by the way. Habitat restoration, which you would think, what's wrong with that, is actually a project in California that has to undergo environmental review. So something that's supposed to do something good, actually, because it might have other consequences. For example, habitat restoration may preclude the use of that land for other economic uses, or it may, in itself, create other water shortage issues if you're going to use the water for habitat restoration. And it looks at long-range plans. But the theme of all those environmental documents looked at big picture plans, not small garage conversions or 2-unit subdivisions, things like that. And what that basically told the state is, and something they already knew, and I think everybody knows, this is a cumulative, big picture problem, not something that you can really deal with on a project-by-project basis. And the studies that were done looked at, what's the regulatory setting, and actually try to quantify emissions. That's difficult, but there's software to figure out what the emissions footprint of things are. You can get it off of the websites and all that, but it's hard to really translate that into real world. This project is going to do produce a certain amount of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas equivalents. Now we're getting to the core of what's going to happen in the end. The basic planning for how to get to the bottom of this identified 50 or so different strategies for dealing with the climate issue, and developed a whole series of strategies, ranging from let's put pressure on the auto industry, let's use alternative fuels, recycling generally, recycled water, different kinds of approaches to the building industry in terms of materials being used, solar roofs and planting trees, a bunch of things, just as policy concepts. And these are things that are now being implemented as requirements in long-range planning efforts of cities. In other words, when these strategies get worked into long-range plans, you come in for your development. At some point, someone's going to say, you've got to put solar panels on your house. And that's becoming more and more prevalent. But these are the strategies that are being prescribed through this law, generally speaking. I don't really want to read all these, but the point here is the strategies that come forward are going to be looked at in the big picture in long-range planning efforts. And it's going to be up to the local cities to have the wherewithal to require those policies to be implemented within individual projects. I don't want to go through this, but this is an example of a flow chart that's been developed by another consultant to give them a sort of a, what do we do if this happens in a project, this is what we do with greenhouse gas emissions. If it's a plan and it doesn't demonstrate that it's in compliance with a certain law, then it's a significant impact, we have to do something about it. If otherwise, then this, then this, and this. In other words, methodologies are being created to do analysis to figure out whether a project should be further evaluated under the law. I'm not going to read these, but these are what the state did was literally compile what consultants have written in their environmental impact reports as possible mitigation measures. The first one has to do with creating long-range plans that the city should do. This one has to do with requiring contractors in the construction industry to use alternative fuels where they can, some of which can't be implemented now because the alternative fuels aren't there for them to use in certain cases. Planting areas planting trees in riparian areas, turning off your engines, and things that are common sense, but requiring these things. There are a lot of questions to consider in doing an analysis. If you're actually going to require things, what is a new greenhouse gas emission? If they wouldn't have built it there, if they're just replacing that development with this development, is that a new emission, or is that just transferring what happened to somewhere else? Greenhouse gas emissions aren't like carbon monoxide or something that's local or airshed specific. It disperses widely globally, so you can't really limit it to one spot. Other questions would be, what would be the appropriate baseline for considering an impact? Is it 1990, where we're trying to get back to, or is it today, the reality of today? What is a significant impact? Does everything have to do this analysis? Does every project have to do this analysis? Or is it just too speculative? Is it just something we can't figure out because it's such a big problem? And what is the mitigation going to be effective, what you're prescribing? I'm not going to go through this. We've covered a lot of this. But here's some observations, and here I kind of want to close up a little bit. I'll open things up for questions. We've already got cities and counties addressing climate change. We've got a whole bunch of approaches being used. It's like the Wild West, It's early in the process. No one's figured it all out. It's like when they were building the railroad across the country. Where should it go? Who should it serve? There's a whole lot of complex technical questions just to make it a workable process. And we haven't figured it all the way out. There's a lot of agencies and organizations and consultants involved in doing this. And frankly, what it's going to come down to are the people with the wherewithal, the consultants and agencies with the wherewithal that come forward with ideas. No one's going to tell them to do it. But the state is breaking new ground. What's the implications of that? By the way, I just want to point out, there are other states involved in doing this. Massachusetts has shown some the beginnings of the same kind of efforts. Certain counties, like in Washington State, are, but it's really pretty new stuff. I'm not going to read all this, but where is it all headed? Well, where I think it's headed is this way. I think, in California, one thing that happens is there are what they call a clean air plan. A clean air plan is something, it's a regional plan done within airsheds that the concept being it quantifies how many pollutants are being spewed into the air as a result of the forecasted development. And then they prescribe a bunch of things you can do to reduce that. In the end, a project that comes in, if it's consistent with the clean air plan, is seen to be consistent with what ought to be happening. And I think a similar mechanism is likely to be developed for climate change issues, rather than to prescribe mitigation on a project-by-project basis. Again, the focus is going to be cumulative. It's going to be more qualitative than quantitative, I think. Though, in the end, the concept of carbon credits or carbon trading may come into that. That is to say, if you know what your carbon footprint is, the plans may ultimately devise a concept, a sliding scale. If you were going to have so much in terms of emissions, you get credit in some way, either in reduced fees for your development, or that you're allowed to somehow build more of what you wanted to do, which I don't know solves the problem. So what are the implications? As long as, and this is sort of where I kind of want to end up on, and sort of leave a question at the end. The state's population is still growing. Agricultural is still a big deal, and development is still going to continue. And so while carbon emissions will likely decrease on a per capita basis if things get ratcheted down, is it going to really decrease overall? But California's efforts are likely to be adopted at some point, somewhere, elsewhere